All right, Colts Nation, here it is. As I release this video tonight, as I record this, April 11th, we are 14 days, 2 weeks from the NFL Draft. Literally 8 p.m., I believe, on April 25th, we will all be sitting there watching what the Colts are going to do. Now, in the lead up to that, you're going to really see two things as a fan of the team. One, you're going to see people like me that are about to give their thoughts on the draft, give you a mock draft, which we will get to today. And you're also going to see rumors, speculation, reports, whatever it is that we want to call them, about what the Colts are going to do. You talk about last season. Who is our quarterback's name right now? Who's our knight in shining armor? His name is Anthony Richardson. But last year before the draft, his name was Will Levis, potentially. Now, ultimately, there's a separation before the draft that you have from a guy as opposed to when he comes on the team. So if you're saying the Colts are going to draft Will Levis, whether or not you believe that is besides the point, you have no choice but to kind of start supporting him in a sense before he comes onto the team, just as your responsibility as a fan, at least in my opinion. Now, sure, we could voice our opinion, but also there is this interesting balance about making sure that you find the positives in a player in the likelihood that a team, or your team rather, goes and drafts him. You look at the reports this year, we're seeing the trade up for Brock Bowers, who a lot of people I think were just maybe hoping fell to number 15, and we can talk about that. But also the name Malik Nabers getting thrown around too. So maybe it's not so much about the player, but instead a show of the willingness that the Indianapolis Colts would trade up if the right opportunity came up. But prior to these reports happening, I think a lot of people thought, well, they're either going to stay put, or you have people like me who think, well, okay, there's a possibility they trade back. Because when you look at what the Colts need, there's a few things, right? You have the secondary and you have wide receiver primarily. I think safety is a bigger need than corner. Some people would say corner bigger than safety, but I think we all agree on one thing: the pass defense needs to be better. There's no doubt about that. Don't forget, during the season, we weren't talking about personnel. We were talking about Gus Bradley, but that's neither here nor there. As we go into the draft, there's no question that at the top of this thing, we're going to have to draft secondary in some way, shape, or form. But even last year, with the franchise quarterback on the line, the Colts weren't willing to trade up. But trade back, on the other hand, we've seen that. We know the type of guy that Chris Ballard is. Now, we've seen him trade up in kind of like the second or the third round or something like that for a player he's into. But from their first-round pick to a higher first-round pick, particularly one inside of the top 10, just doesn't seem very likely. But with these reports, one thing is very clear. No matter which way it goes, it seems that there's a decent likelihood, at minimum, that the Colts won't be picking at number 15. And that's totally fine. But then the question becomes, which way do you go? Now, obviously, they can both work, but if I'm to just sit here and talk about it, I don't know. I think the Colts really have to get a corner and have to get a safety high. I think they have to get both positions. The problem is that I think they could also use a receiver that could play on the outside. So basically, you're in a spot where you haven't addressed these things in free agency because you want to do it through the draft. You can be upset about that. Whatever, right? I'm just telling you what's in front of us. Forget the emotions for a second. Are you in the position to trade up? So you would have to take your 15th overall pick, obviously, as a part of that trade. No one's going to let you keep that if you're trading up, right? So you take the 15th overall pick and then potentially your second rounder this year to then go trade up to the first rounder. Maybe you could get something else from them, but all of a sudden you have a gap potentially, barring you were to throw them a pick from next year and get around it that way. That you go from, let's say, the 8th pick, wherever it is that you would get a Adonai, Nabers, Bowers, something like that. That 8th overall pick, that 7th, that 9th overall pick, you trade up to that, and all of a sudden you don't have a pick until number 82 in the draft. Are we sure that's the way we want to go about this? As opposed to looking at it and saying there's a lot of players that we like, and if we were to trade back, well, Cooper DeJean is a guy that's in play right there. You got Adonai Mitchell out of Texas, a complete stud. He's a guy that's going in the 20s. Kool-Aid McKinstry going in the 20s. Nate Wiggins going in the 20s. Terrion Arnold, Quinyon Mitchell right in front of our face potentially. These names, there's only so many guys. There's so many options, but also we kind of have an idea of who they are, at least those of us who are kind of looking at the draft leading up. There's two types of fans. There's the types that show up when the season starts, and then there's us right now playing games in the offseason, right? So I don't know. For me, the way I've been viewing it so far in experimenting with mock drafts, I think trading back gives the Colts a little bit more flexibility in terms of how they want to approach this thing, while also giving them an opportunity for a lot of great players. Now, also trading back gives you the possibility to have 2 second-round picks this year. We don't know exactly what the terms of the deal would be, but hypothetically speaking, someone would give their first rounder and their second rounder to move up to number 15 from the 20s, right? So with that, you're able to draft, basically get a 3 for 2, or maybe you could use those 2 second rounders to trade up back into the first round. But no matter what it is, the point is that the flexibility is there. So we're going to do a mock draft. We are going to do it with the trade back simply because I said it. I think it's going to work based off of what I've done. I don't know it's going to work. We could, of course, do mock drafts leading up to the drafts that are not those types of things as well. But I basically just wanted to introduce my thoughts on it before I just get into a mock draft. You see my picks and judge me off of those. These things are very fluid. These things change per simulation, right? But I want to introduce you to the trade back. If you haven't thought about the way it can play out, I want to give you one mock draft where we say, all right, let's do it. Or maybe we'll do the 15th overall pick. But let me share my screen first. Bear with me. I'm just starting to experiment with this type of thing on StreamYard. So, I'm not great at it. What can I say? All right. There's that. Can you see it? You can. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Okay, bang. There you go. So 15th overall pick, Indianapolis Colts will do 3 rounds, so I don't put you to sleep with a hypothetical draft that isn't happening. But I want to be able to talk through it just a little bit. So I'll put hold on. That was the default. Let's slow this thing down a little bit so we can see it happen. And let's start. I said we were going to trade back. We probably will trade back because that early is my favorite thing to do. But I want to just kind of look at the way this thing plays out here. So there's Cooper DeJean. Now that's a problem, right? That throws a wrench in the plan right off the bat, because my whole thing about trading back is that Cooper DeJean would be there. Now, in theory, you have Quinyon Mitchell and Terrion Arnold in front of your face. And these two, I think, are an interesting discussion because Quinyon Mitchell, listen, their tape on him is not as readily available, at least for someone like you or me, unless you know something that I don't. You're able to watch a lot more Terrion Arnold than you are Quinyon Mitchell. We have one game that is really like the pinnacle game. You go back, you look at him versus Ohio State. I'm talking about not in terms of maybe his best performance, even though it was a very good performance. He looked all the part in this game, but in terms of like him against the realest look we can get. CJ Stroud playing at Ohio State against Marvin Harrison Jr. And you say, okay, he looked the part in this game. Historically speaking, statistically, for people who are into that, I can't even find my nerdy glasses right now. I usually put those things on for those of you who have seen the bit before. But statistically, he's the guy. And again, he looks good on tape, so I don't even want to dismiss it. I'm not saying stats to make it like he's not a good player, but we get mad at a guy like Chris Ballard sometimes for trying to be the smartest guy in the room. Is drafting the Toledo product over the Alabama product, potentially setting that stage right there. And the question is, if you would be upset at Chris Ballard for that in 2 years, but want Quinyon Mitchell now, just something to think about. But in this case, I don't know. Could we trade back right here? Hopefully this is all working out because I haven't looked at my screen. So you don't want the Jaguars, right, to pick before us. Let's go to the Eagles. So we're going to trade back to the Eagles, who we know we're going to go secondary in all fairness, but they'll also give us a 2nd round pick, presumably. We'll offer that right there, and we'll be on our merry way. Oh, let's toss the 7th rounder. And we're in it. Okay, so they went Quinyon Mitchell. Let the Eagles have him. We do business with them all the time. Now, right now, you're saying, holy crap, Justin, we just missed out on Terrion Arnold and Quinyon Mitchell, who are the guys that we're talking about the entire time. Well, okay, so here we are. We have Nate Wiggins, and we have Kool-Aid. We also have the 46th and the 50th overall pick right now. I'm going to go secondary between Wiggins and Kool-Aid. You pick your poison. It's hard for me to not like both of them as a prospect based off of what I saw. 1, because I'm not an expert on corners. And 2, the overall consensus is that they are high. So if I watch them and I say, well, they don't look bad, and then everyone says they're great, what do you want me to say? I'm not an expert on the position. So I'm going to take, for the sake of the experiment, Nate Wiggins. Could have been Kool-Aid. I'll take Kool-Aid, actually. Let's do Kool-Aid. Name's cooler anyway. So do we want to trade up? Do we want to trade up now? Because if I were to trade up as the GM in mind, remember Shane Steichen, Reggie Wayne at Texas for that pro day. Is a guy like Adonai Mitchell in play? We know the possibility of the Bills doing that at number 28, given the fact that he is still on the board. The Buccaneers, they just signed Mike Evans. Doesn't look like a first-round option. We really need to take either the Buccaneers or the Cardinals pick if we were to trade up for Adonai Mitchell here. And with that, I think I'm going to. So let's get the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and assume that the Packers do not cuck us right there, not to use a disgusting term. But there's that. Likely accepted. Can we get a little bit more? Can we get a little bit more? All right. We'll do that to get the video on. So resume the draft. Now we're here. Okay. We take Adonai Mitchell, who I like over Brian Thomas. Nice to see these two next to each other so I could give my take on this, right? Adonai Mitchell, in my opinion, to keep it frank, there's a video in the description if you want to see my full thoughts on this. Brian Thomas is a freak, right? You talk about him down the field, 17 touchdowns. That's a historic number. We get all of these things. But when you watch the tape, as a football fan, you cannot tell me that Brian Thomas is more impressive than Adonai Mitchell when it comes to being able to run the route tree. And to make it like Adonai Mitchell doesn't have a 9.99 RAS himself, which is higher than Brian Thomas, to make it like he's not quite the athlete himself, that's insane. To me, Adonai Mitchell reminds me of an AJ Green. That would be my pro comp for him. And with that, we're taking him right here. So we walked out of this with a corner and a wide receiver, and now we head on to the third round. No safety. That's a little bit of a problem. But ultimately, how many trades am I possibly going to make in this one right here? So listen, we're doing it as we go in terms of the mock draft. But for me personally, if I walk out of the draft with Kool-Aid McKinstry and Adonai Mitchell, it's already a win. For me, it's already a win. To get two guys that I think pack a punch like that right off the bat, only by trading back would we have been able to pull that off because we had the capital to then go ahead and trade up. Now, right here, I mean, in this round, what do we want to do, right? You have the two corners out of Florida State, both of which serve slightly different purposes, but both of which are kind of, in range here. We did not go safety. Now, how much do you care about reaching here? I don't know. I think Caden Bullock has he's a high upside, high floor type of safety. I kind of like what he brings to the table. I think in a real world situation, I may trade back here, but I don't want to extend the video any more than I have to. So I'm going to go Caden Bullock, but I would either draft him there. Oh, we got the 89th pick. Malachi Corley. That's an easy pick. All right. See, that's the beauty of trading back. I forgot about it. I'm not in the war room, I'm not in there. So I wasn't paying attention like that. I knew it was part of the trade back, but what are you going to do? So you walk out of a draft, you say Kool-Aid McKinstry for me. I love that. Adonai Mitchell, great. Kalen Bullock comes into a young room. Listen, we got to do something at safety. There's still guys out there to sign, right? You can't get everything in one draft unless you trade like 3 or 4 times. And then Malachi Corley, love that as a little luxury pick to help out the offense on the back end. Now you're talking cooking with fire with Michael Pittman Jr., Adonai Mitchell, Malachi Corley, of course, Josh Downs, Alec Pierce. Josh Downs should have been said second on that list, so I don't mean any disrespect right there. And then we move on with our merry day. But that's just one of the possibilities. What I really wanted to do is demonstrate why I think trading back provides the most flexibility and the ability to accumulate the most talent. And if we're going to do it in the draft, we want to get as many good players as we possibly can. So let me stop the share right there, however the heck you do that, and come back to you. But that right there was it. I'm curious to hear what you think about that mock draft for starters, but also what you would do if you were the Indianapolis Colts. So much when we talk about mock drafts, it's kind of like, what are they going to do? What should they do? Which one are we talking about, right? Because those are two very different discussions, and some people may be more interested in one than the other. So that was my opinion right there. For the most part, maybe that'll change by next week, but I figured a little talk about the draft on a Thursday night, 2 weeks until the end of the world or the beginning of a dynasty, the likes of which we have never seen before. We're going to find out, but in the meantime, let's be fair, we don't know how it plays out. So for all y'all upset in the comment section, take a moment, deep breath, goose fraba, a little bit of the za, and then we call it a day. My name is Justin. This right here was the Ride on the Bench Colts podcast. And as always, Go Colts.